Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, it's official. Prohibitionist Terrence Cole has been approved to head up the DEA. Is rescheduling doomed? Plus, the DEA judge who stalled the rescheduling process, John Mulrooney, retires. And MSO Cresco Labs, one of the biggest cannabis retail operators, pulls out of California. Dina Nagib has that story from the Golden State. And that special session of the Texas legislature convened this week and has delivered a bill similar to the hemp ban bill that Governor Greg Abbott vetoed, but this time insiders believe it will pass. Kerry Hinkle has industry reaction. Plus, the first European country to legalize adult use of cannabis, the tiny nation of Malta, has reversed course and is now partially recriminalizing the plant's consumption while warning its citizens to contain the, quote, nuisance odors. All that and state reports from coast to coast and our international reports on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto. Next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. This is WPCM TV's weekly documentation of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Another reminder to download our app in order to get first access to our show every week on Monday when we release. It's free, and if you scan the QR code, it will link to the App Store and Google Play. Our top story this week is the confirmation of Terrence Cole as the new head of the DEA. The outspoken prohibitionist earned that reputation when he was in Virginia as the Secretary of Public Safety. Our resident correspondent in Virginia is Joe Parsons, who shares the influence Cole had on that state and his impact on the veto governor, Glenn Youngkin.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk. Sponsored by 97.5 3WV and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Senate confirmed Terrence Cole, former Virginia Secretary of Public Safety, to the head of the DEA last week. Cole has said that rescheduling cannabis will be his top priority as DEA head. Well, now the time has come to see if that was just political smoke and mirrors, or will he indeed work to move cannabis off the Schedule I list, where it has been since 1970. Cole, a known prohibitionist, was one of the biggest factors in the delay of an adult use market in the Commonwealth, working alongside Governor Glenn Youngkin. So I'm a little skeptical. A Charlottesville man is in custody after a police bus seized over 6,000 fentanyl pills and a firearm in the Fifeville neighborhood. 23-year-old Jatavius Turner Jones was charged with possession with the intent to sell of the deadly narcotic. There is a recent rise in cannabis spiked with the drug, mostly coming from the unregulated illegal pop-up market that continues to plague the Commonwealth. While there isn't a clear connection that these pills were going to be used in cannabis, it is good that these pills were taken off the market before they could have wound up in the untested cannabis market. The operation was the work of the Virginia State Police and the 3A Task Force. The Charlottesville Police were not involved in this operation. So great job to the 3A Task Force and the State Police for getting these horrible pills off the market. This week on Coffee Talk, I had WPCM TV's very own Tina Tasaka on the show to discuss all the latest headlines in cannabis from the tribal nation. As always, Tina was an amazing interview and guest, and I'd like to thank her for being with Seth and myself this week. Catch the episode by going to www.3wv.com every Monday at 4:20 p.m. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
In another development out of our nation's capital, the DEA Judge John Mulrooney, who was instrumental in the delay of the rescheduling efforts during the Biden administration, has retired. Advocates and policymakers are concerned with the depth of prohibitionists in key positions in the federal government as rescheduling of cannabis becomes more and more less likely to pass. Here's Andrew Behringer.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Drug Enforcement Administration's Chief Administrative Law Judge, John Mulrooney II, recently announced that he will retire on August 1st, leaving the Biden administration's cannabis rescheduling proposal without a presiding judge and casting uncertainty over the future of how this may turn out. In a July 23rd notice, Mulrooney told designated hearing participants he will no longer have jurisdiction after his departure. His retirement leaves the DEA without any administrative law judge to oversee the high-profile proceedings or any other agency enforcement cases, as required by federal law. Now, the hearing examining a proposal to move cannabis from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 under the Controlled Substance Act has been on hold since January 13th of this year, when Mulrooney granted an appeal amid allegations that the DEA staff had improperly communicated with anti-rescheduling groups. Although Mulrooney retained limited authority to handle procedural matters, no substantive progress has occurred in 6 months, partly due to lack of action of leadership by the DEA. That now changes with the confirmation of Terrence Cole as DEA Administrator on July 21st. Cole inherits the responsibility to move the process forward, including appointing a new judge or determining a new path for the stalled proceedings. During his confirmation hearings, Cole told lawmakers that rescheduling cannabis would be a top priority, but stopped short of communicating back about how he will do that. And remember, this all came back when the Joe Biden administration went through Health and Human Services to propose this rescheduling process. In a parting message, Mulrooney urged all parties to pursue a resolution that is fair and transparent and accurate, while warning that arrogant and overconfidence in the process could undermine its legitimacy moving forward. The future of the federal cannabis policy now rests squarely in the hands of the DEA's new leadership. Well, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Also in Washington, D.C. this week, the executive director of the NCIA, Aaron Smith, has resigned. While he will stay on that trade association's board of directors, Aaron is moving on to a group called Unite America, a bipartisan organization whose mission is to create a more functional political system. Aaron will hold the title of political director. Executive producer Jimmy Young talked with Aaron about this move after 15 years with the NCIA.
Thanks, Alaina. I have mixed feelings about this next interview that I'm doing because Aaron Smith has been part of the pro-cannabis movement in Washington, D.C. for 15 years, maybe even longer. And now he is moving on from his executive director position. And I have to ask him, Aaron, it doesn't have anything to do with your co-host on the NCIA podcast, does it?
Absolutely not. And I think this podcast is going to be something that I always think fondly of and miss going forward.
And looking back at what you've accomplished over this 15-year run, I mean, forget the last 3, 4, 5 years where it's been like, whoa. And 15 years ago, there was nothing going on. So you've built quite a bit. You must take a lot of satisfaction with the fact that you've built something that has made an impact on this industry.
Yeah, I mean, it is really gratifying when you step back and think about, obviously it's not just me. A lot of people came before me as well and continued to do this work. But when we started NCIA, I was 5 years into the movement. I worked at MPP 5 years before. So I look at the last 20 years too. But when we started NCIA 15 years ago, there were 2 members of Congress that were willing to step forward and say they supported cannabis reform. One of them might have been yours, Barney Frank.
100%. My parents voted for him many
Barney
years.
Frank. He was one of them. And then on the Republican side, you had Ron Paul down in Texas.
Yep.
And those are the only 2. And they had introduced a bill, I believe, either the year just before NCIA launched or the year we launched. And I think that was it in terms of co-sponsors. That bill went nowhere, of course. You fast forward to today, I think we have the majority of the House. If we don't, we're really close. Even though it's a Republican-controlled House, we have almost every Democrat and a good number of Republicans that are, including the president and then the former president, have all supported some level of federal reform. So it's pretty exciting, and I think the industry is at its tipping point.
And still plenty of work to be done too, isn't there?
A lot of work to be done, and we still need to see cannabis reform at the federal level before the industry really has the ability to fulfill its entire potential. We need to be able to see, things like normal pay, deductions on taxes, not to mention interstate commerce, international commerce. All of these things are really impeded right now because of federal law. And Congress, while we do have that support, we have 7 out of 10 Americans support federal reform. A good chunk of Congress, if not the majority of Congress, getting this issue up to the fore has been quite a challenge. But it's doable with continued work and investment.
And no wonder you're going to where you're going, because you do love a challenge. You're going to work for an organization that's going to be about uniting the division that's evolved here in our modern times in the United States of America. I mean, you talk about hazardous duty. I mean, come on, Aaron. You love a challenge, don't you?
It's going to be a challenge, but it's an important one, and it's foundational to everything. If you look at cannabis is one issue that Congress is unable to address, but they're also unable to address gun safety, reproductive rights, immigration, all of these big issues that are just kind of held hostage by the system being so dysfunctional. And what my new charge is to create some reforms in the institutional systems that are in place to elect officials so that their incentives are realigned. Right now, the incentive, if you're a member of Congress, is to pander to your primary base voter, which is, if you're a Democrat, that's someone on the far left. If you're a Republican, that's someone on the far right. But the majority of Americans are in the middle. And so we need to have a system that reflects that. And that's exactly what I'm looking forward to doing at Unite America.
Well, fantastic. I wish you the best of luck. And if there's ever anything I can do to help you, don't lose my numbers. Pretty much what I'm saying.
Next up, the state of Texas, where their governor, Greg Abbott, convened a special session of his legislature this week to work on improving the hemp ban bill he vetoed 3 weeks ago. At the same time, a Democratic representative named Jessica Gonzalez filed a bill to legalize adult use. Now, it's doubtful that this bill will make it to the floor in the Texas House, but if it does, citizens will be allowed to have as much as 2.5 ounces in their possession and 10 ounces in their homes. But that amount would have to be in a locked, secure, child-proof storage area. Gifting would be allowed, but home grow would not. If passed, the licensing and regulations would have to be in place by November of 2026. So can a state that can't agree on how to keep their vibrant hemp market alive actually jump straight to legalization? Once again, doubtful. So what's happening with the battle over hemp in Texas? Well, Carrie Hinkle has an update on that.
Hi, everyone. This is Carrie Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp, back again for another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, we head back down to our company's home state of Texas, where yet again, Lieutenant Governor is attempting to ban all hemp products. Last session, we saw SB 3 pass through both chambers, and at the last minute, with about 20 minutes to go before the deadline to veto or sign a bill, Governor Abbott vetoed SB 3, which would have banned all hemp products that had any quantifiable amounts of THC, leaving only CBD and CBG isolate. Well, Dan Patrick and the special session, when we have floods and redistricting and a lot of other top priority issues, has decided to yet again introduce another complete ban on hemp products. This time, it's SB 5, and there's a little bit of nuanced differences in this one, in that they took court cases that have been decided in Arkansas and a lawsuit that was filed in conjunction with the veto campaign in Texas, and used that language to better write SB 5 in a sense that it's going to be harder to litigate against. It exempts hemp hulls and seeds and allows for Epidiolex, which is a FDA-approved CBD drug, to now be expressly legal in Texas. Now, the House and the governor are opposed to this complete ban, and Governor Abbott said as much this week in an interview with a local TV station that he had referenced 3 milligrams as a possibility, but There's also reports that maybe he meant 0.3%. So as always, this is a complicated issue, and so we could understand if the governor meant 0.3%, 3 milligrams. It's unsure at this point what exactly he meant. So we're going to continue to monitor and report as things develop. This is a 30-day special session, and with everything else that's going on, there's a good chance that nothing happens at the end of this special session, but the governor could call another one. And so this will be a long fight before we decide hemp's future in the state of Texas. Again, this is Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp. I'll see you again next week.
In California this week, a state rep introduced a bill that would allow small craft growers in that state the opportunity to export their products to other states. This is something that has a long way to go, considering cannabis is still a federally illegal product. Yet it could set a precedent for interstate commerce. Here's Dina Nagib.
I'm Dina Nagib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest developments in California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Last week, Cresco Labs was in the news as the latest MSO to exit the California market. Cresco reportedly is in negotiations with prospective buyers who are interested in their California cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution operations. This move is similar to Curaleaf and Trulieve, who left the California market in 2023, demonstrating that the market hasn't gotten any better. In other news, there is a new bill proposed called the Small and Homestead Independent Producers Act, or SHIP Act. It was introduced by Representative Jared Huffman and would allow the state's smallest cannabis farmers to mail cannabis within the state. In addition, if cannabis were removed as a controlled substance at the federal level, it would also allow shipment to other states where cannabis is legal. To be eligible under the bill, the cultivator would need to have 1 acre or less of outdoor canopy, 22,000 square feet or less greenhouse canopy, or 5,000 square feet or less indoor canopy, and have gross annual revenue less than $5 million. This could offer a unique opportunity to smaller businesses that is desperately needed in the state. That's it for California news this week. I'm Dina Nagib with Grass Goddess Consulting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Cresco Labs, one of the country's largest cannabis MSOs, is officially leaving California. The Chicago-based company announced it's offloading its cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution operations in the Golden State, a move aimed at preserving cash as $400 million in debt looms in 2026. CEO Charlie Batchel called California the largest cannabis market in the world, but pointed to its structural issues, fragmented retail, price compression, and the persistent illicit market. He says the state simply doesn't offer sustainable profitability. Cresco's exit follows industry giants like Curaleaf and Trulieve, who also pulled out of California last year. Still, Cresco plans to keep its well-known FloraCal brand alive, selling it across the U.S., with cannabis sales dropping from $5.1 billion in 2023 to $4.6 billion in 2024, and excess tax jumping to 19%. California's crown as cannabis king is starting to slip. Cresco stock, once trading at $15 in 2021, is now hovering around 68 cents. So let's see how the stock chart looks. It's curling up, as most cannabis stocks have been, and they are looking good. So watch for any pullback and be sure to trade smart and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Last week, we reported on the suspension of the license of Alexachrome Analytical Labs in New York after 3 recalls of their tested product in the last 6 weeks. And now that lab has ceased operations and closed. The New York State Office of Cannabis Management isn't sure if they will be pursuing more fines against the lab that had passed cannabis with mold and banned pesticides. It was the retesting of those products that caused the recall, the fines, and license suspensions. One more note on New York City. You might remember that the annual city cannabis parade was postponed this year after 49 years. Parade organizers weren't able to get the city to offer them any permits, and this past week in Harlem, a different celebration in that city was downsized. Well, now organizers are hoping that the city will allow the parade to return next year and still allow the Harlem event to take place. The state of Alabama continues to struggle with the enforcement and changes to the hemp laws in that state, a struggle that caused our reporter there, Jennifer Boozer, to close up her business, Cannabama. Now let's check in with her to see how she and other hemp businesses are holding up and holding on.
For Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting to you from Alabama. The Alabama Cannabis Coalition, after 13 years, decided to perform the laborious task to vet all Alabama candidates for the 2026 midterm election to determine who the anti-prohibitionist candidates are and endorse their campaigns. It is time for the citizens of Alabama to know who supports their access to legal cannabis and who the prohibitionists are. It is high time to end cannabis prohibition in Alabama. Informed voters will determine our success. That was a quote from Marty Schupper, founder and president of the Alabama Cannabis Coalition. They have been working hard to contact and vet all of the candidates from the governor's office down to local mayoral races. Sweet Home Cannabama hopes to help them keep that information flowing to the people every week and will soon be having weekly calls to action so that people in the public who are frustrated with HB 445, the 4-year slowdown of the medical cannabis program rollout, and the need for decriminalization in Alabama instead of more felonies, every week on the show. So far, Alabama Cannabis Coalition has endorsed 2026 candidates Will Boyd for Governor of Alabama, Dr. Deidre Willis, Commissioner for Agriculture and Industry, Mandy Ledkins, Alabama State Senator, District 14, Donald Modern, Alabama State Senator, District 11, and Nell Brown, Alabama House Rep, District 15. And in 2025 municipal elections, they have endorsed Portia Shepard for Mayor of Uniontown, Alabama, Keith Williams, Birmingham City Council, District 6, and Chad Moore, Mayor of Marion, Alabama. Between the lack of access to medical cannabis and now the very restricted access to hemp products, businesses shuttering all over the state, and the need for decriminalization after 2 citizens have been arrested for a Class C felony for possession of hemp products, now is the time to get involved in the elections. Stay tuned to Sweet Home Cannabama every Monday night at 7 p.m. on FM Talk 106.5 and on our Sweet Home Cannabama YouTube page. We will have these weekly calls to action so you know who to email, who to call, where to show up, and how to vote. Reporting from Alabama, Jennifer Boozer Stewart for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the A block of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, but we have some international reports coming up next, including the story of the first European nation to legalize adult use of cannabis. And now Malta is recriminalizing targeting the strong odor of the plant. So, I don't know, can't someone come up with a way to create odor-free cannabis? Probably not. Besides, some people actually like the smell of weed and hate the smell of cigarettes and cigars. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, or second section of our news program. I'm Alaina Pinto. The island country of Malta, which is located in the Mediterranean Sea south of Sicily and Italy, was the first country in Europe to legalize adult use of cannabis in 2021. That law allowed possession of 7 grams in public and 50 at home, as well as the freedom to grow up to 4 plants. Since then, public concern over the pungent odor of the plant medicine has increased complaints, and these changes have been made to curb that negative reaction by the public. Now, if you smoke at home and your neighbor complains, you would be subject to a stiff fine equivalent to $275. We start our international reports from Europe. Here's Ben Stevens.
I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, with this week's report from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Now, this week, 2 of Europe's leading cannabis reformers have made some major progress towards adult use legalization. First up, in Switzerland, following 2 years of running government-backed cannabis pilot projects in cities like Zurich, Bern and Basel, the positive results of these pilots have encouraged lawmakers to continue pushing ahead with permanent reform. At the beginning of this year, the National Council Committee approved a preliminary draft bill that would allow cultivation, consumption, possession and sale of cannabis legally. This week, the National Council's Social Security and Health Committee has given the green light to the Federal Act on Cannabis Products, laying the foundations for the possible legalization of cannabis across Switzerland. This latest development, according to local advocate organisation IG Hemp, is a historic moment for Swiss cannabis policy and shows that there is the political will to effectively combat the black market and strengthen consumer safety. With this latest vote of support, the draft bill will begin a 3-month consultation phase in the coming weeks. Once that's finished, a newly revised draft will be prepared and head to the Federal Council and National Council for a final vote, though it has also been suggested that this could go to a referendum, putting the Swiss public in control of its passage. Meanwhile, over in the similarly cannabis liberal Czech Republic, efforts to decriminalise cannabis have officially been signed into law, seeing advocates breathe a long-fought sigh of relief. While this battle has been won, the war is still far from over, with efforts to establish Europe's first commercial cannabis market still underway, but seemingly on ice. From January 1st, adults aged 21 and over will be allowed to grow up to 3 plants, carry 25 grams and keep up to 100 grams in their home, but legal retail, cannabis clubs and cannabis stores are for now off the table. That's all for this week's European Cannabis Report. I am Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor with your UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. An illegal immigrant has been sentenced to 8 months in prison after pleading guilty to cultivating some 400 cannabis plants in a house near Newcastle in the north of England. The judge described how Vu Nguyen, 33, who came to the UK from Vietnam 5 years ago on the back of a lorry, was living in miserable conditions, sleeping on a mattress in the kitchen when he was arrested back in March. The court also heard how Mr. Nguyen had been growing cannabis in exchange for food, which would arrive by delivery driver to the property every 2 months. According to the prosecutor, the cannabis plants are worth between £21,000 and £96,000. After serving his sentence, it's expected that Mr. Nguyen will be deported. The news comes as the British government's ongoing campaign to curb illegal migration continues to gather pace and garner media attention. Could it be that a failure to provide adequate provisions, less than £50 per week for asylum seekers, is pushing those in desperate need into illegal activity? By contrast, the UK continues to be the largest cultivator of medical cannabis globally, accounting for 43% of the total international market in 2021, with the vast majority exported. That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is the finding by Pure Sun Farms, which did a research study on how the THC percentages have been differentiating between batches. And they found that throughout the process that what they have been doing is instead of actually cropping each plant and producing a batch out of that, they are cropping layered by layered when it comes to the plants, which means that the THC percentages has been fluctuating in between the 7 to 8% range when it comes between each batch being launched or being then distributed among the OCS. This is something that now hopefully more LPs will be looking into, especially when it comes to their batch loads and when it comes to their percentaging, because we don't want to be putting any false information on our packaging, because that would obviously make it pretty much deceitful. The CBSA officers has seized $1.2 million in cannabis at the Calgary airport. This is obviously something that is very, I don't want to say startling, but is startling due to the fact that we do have the legal industry, but the black market seems to still be running wild, especially when it comes to that much money being seized by the CBSA. This is something that we are going to be obviously looking more into and hopefully getting a little bit more information and putting a little bit more strategic planning when it comes to these traffickers. When it comes to Canada, this is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. Cheers. Peace.
The Commonwealth of Massachusetts has developed a vibrant adult use market since opening day for sales in November of 2018. And now a milestone was reached, and that was announced by the Cannabis Control Commission this week. Here's Curtis Emery with the detail.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Good news out of Mass, the adult use market has officially surpassed $8 billion in revenue since the market opened. 2025 is on pace to beat out 2024, a stellar year in cannabis, with top sales items including flower, followed closely behind by vaporizers. Top sales days in Mass include April 17th and 18th, the lead up to 420, and July 2nd. Also out of Mass, a joint committee met last week to consider two bills, one on billboard advertising in the state and another on sales, discounts, and loyalty programs on the dispensary level. Advocates of the billboard bill are hoping that billboards will be a way for small, local, and equity-owned companies to advertise in-state without dealing with the state's strict regulations on audience ratios and dealing with MSOs who are currently gaming the system while also affording to pay the fines levied by the state. People against the bill are concerned that exposing children to cannabis billboards might develop unnecessary habits before legal age. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And we have a bonus story out of Massachusetts. Executive producer Jimmy Young was on hand at a cannabis-friendly golf tournament in Sterling, Massachusetts. Now, there's no need to twist Jimmy's arm to attend such a worthy fundraising event, and we look forward to seeing what he has to say.
Ah, the sounds of golf and the smell of cannabis. Well, that's been part of this culture for years. This past week at the Heritage Country Club in Sterling, Massachusetts, Angela Bradbury's Canna Management Group organized this event.
You know, the whole goal of the event was to create an intimate setting for our operators. And we feel like we did exactly that. So created that space, that energy, and of course, blending those both worlds, right, of that golf industry with the cannabis industry. So it was extremely fun for us.
On an absolutely perfect day for summer golf in New England, a dozen vendors and foursomes raised money and awareness for the Gosder Cherilus Foundation and the Worcester Food Bank. But I was intrigued with the putting green competition. Okay, what's Canna Management doing here?
All right, Canna Management is setting up a little putting game today at High on the Green. If you hit one of our pre-rolls or one of our Squires, then you're a winner and you get to keep it. Squires Pink Pineapple Elixir, my personal favorite.
Adam Denault went home with the big prize.
Hey! You hit the money!
That's
Oh,
quite a
absolutely.
stash.
I know. You
How
want
many pre-rolls are in there?
Jeez, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pre-rolls.
I've never seen a putting for pre-rolls event that you guys had on the putting green, and I want to know who came up with that idea.
Well, just going to golf events, right? There's always a putt and play. Typically, it's focused on alcohol. And so we just really wanted to switch that out, highlight our vendors, our supporters of the event.
I'm Jimmy Young reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News in Sterling, Massachusetts.
One of the best challenges for law enforcement in this new era of adult use of cannabis is the ability to test drivers under its influence, proving that people, and especially medical patients who operate vehicles under the influence, might not be impaired. Many state legislatures are trying to figure out how to detect if a driver is operating under the influence, but because every person has a different tolerance, proving impairment is still not an exact science. But now, a professor of law at the Rutgers-Camden School of Law has published a paper outlining why the tests being administered by police are pseudoscientific police science. Professor McNichols's paper outlines the challenges of conducting roadside tests for impairment. He calls on the substance use scientific community to come up with a test that reflects the fact that being under the influence of cannabis is different than testing for alcohol. McNichol argues that, quote, existing tools for making this on-the-spot medico-legal determination are inadequate, owing in large part to their lack of scientific rigor, unquote. Our own Amy Carter continues to lobby for changes in the detection laws and practices in her state of Michigan. Here's her report for this week.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm reporting this week at the second annual Boonie Bash in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. There are bands, vendors, music throughout the weekend, and a ton of different things to do, from axe throwing to glass blowing to a video arcade. This is a great event that you should definitely attend next year. Get ready, Muskegon. Cannabis businesses with drive-thrus can now stay open until 2 a.m. Used to be midnight. 3 dispensaries, including the family-owned Grassy Knoll, Bodega, and Greencraft, are leading the night shift, with Grassy Knoll racking up to 7,000 to 9,000 transactions monthly, mostly between 9 p.m. and midnight. The Grassy Knoll is a family-owned shop that opened in November 2021. Meanwhile, Lansing's Hey Captain is shaking up the edible market. Forget about the usual gummies. This innovative brand offers melt-in-your-mouth candies with the motto, no gummies, no brownies, no bullshit. Founded by cannabis pioneer Captain Kirk, their unique treats have already snagged 11 High Times Cannabis cups. Hey Captain edibles are products sold at multiple locations across Michigan, so definitely check them out. That's it for this week. I'm Amy Carter from Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Over the past few weeks, Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, has been reporting on the challenges of impaired driving in his state of Illinois. Officers can still pull drivers over if the smell of cannabis is present, but there are 2 sets laws regarding the smell of raw flower or burnt flower and depend on the officer to distinguish between the two. Here's the Chicago clone guy's report for this week.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy, reporting out of Chicago, Illinois area for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is Bird. Thanks for tuning in. Happy to report that the second annual Illinois Craft Showcase is going on next month in Tilton, Illinois at Molly's Joint. What this event is actually 50 plus craft brands, which is a craft cannabis grower. The difference between that and the commercial is pretty much the big guy, and the craft is kind of the little guy. So there's going to be 50 plus craft brands for the second annual craft brand showcase going on at Molly's Joint in August on the 16th. Looking forward to that. I'm actually going to be in attendance there talking to a lot of people about clones. Imagine that, especially the local craft people. So come visit me there. Oh, great news is that you can get free tickets through the Illinois News Joint. Illinois News Joint. You can go on there, look for it, and you can get free tickets to the show if you want to go. There's also free samples from all these craft brands, more vendors and more. So yeah, literally free, legal cannabis samples to try out at the show, and you can get free tickets. Check it out. Pretty cool. What else is going on? Oh, big news here I think is pretty cool in Illinois. The sales numbers I got for May were almost $150 million of sales for the whole state in May. The reason why this is kind of important is that we're on track to really beat the crap out of last year numbers-wise. Last year, we didn't hit the 150 million mark until the late winter. I think it was about November, actually about October or November. So we hit that number well before that mark this year. So last year, we hit $2 billion in sales. Maybe we'll do $3 billion. Time will tell. But I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
My name is Xavier Jaillet. I'm the chair of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and a cannabis attorney at McDonald Hopkins. And here's what's happening in Colorado cannabis news this week. This week's story revolves around a controversial person here in the Colorado cannabis community, Wanda James, one of the first Black cannabis business owners in the United States, and an ongoing support of social equity and Black-owned businesses in cannabis. Ms. James was elected to the Board of Regents of the University of Colorado, where she oversaw various things, including budget spending and public relations. Now, the University of Colorado recently issued a campaign called the T on THC, which was a campaign focused on educating families and youth around the risk of consuming high THC cannabis products. Controversially, the campaign, the imagery used in the campaign, largely featured Black and brown babies and families, seemingly indicated that these were the communities that most needed the attention of the campaign and the education it provided. Ms. James flagged that as being racially insensitive, and the University of Colorado ultimately agreed with her, pulling many of the controversial images and issuing a formal apology. Now, this week's story focuses on Ms. James's continued push to have that program actually defunded that ultimately resulted in this campaign. Surprisingly, she has the support of the Colorado governor, Jared Polis, but unfortunately she does not have the support of her fellow Board of Regent members, who voted 7-1 against Ms. James to censure her, claiming that her campaign to defund this program reflected a breach of her duty of loyalty and a potential conflict of interest between her personal interests and that as her role as a regent. Now, this is an ongoing saga that underscores the importance of Black business owners in the cannabis community and the need for the community as a whole to attempt to rectify past injustices for cannabis consumption, distribution, and use, primarily by the Black and brown communities across the United States. So stay tuned for more information on this story as it progresses. And I'm Xavier Jaillet reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B block, or second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. This is the C block, or last section of this week's show, and our final reminder to scan the QR code on the screen to take you to the App Store or Google Play and download the new PCM TV app. Just remember, if you don't use the QR code when you search, just make sure there's a space between PCM and TV when you do.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. It was a champs week this past week at the Las Vegas Convention Center, and this year, Snoop slid away from the show and surprised fans by stepping behind the counter at Raising Cane's in Henderson, Nevada, at the corner of Lake Mead and Boulder Highway. He became a Cane's ambassador at the drive-thru with a headset and took orders during a pop-up shift held in honor of National Chicken Finger Day, which is coming up this Sunday. National commercials are already airing. Fans were thrilled. Not only did he serve chicken fingers, but he also greeted customers and posed for selfies. Imagine the shock. I would have spilled my drink. Let's roll the video.
Okay, you're going to like this one. Rapper Snoop Dogg became a local Raising Cane's employee earlier today.
What's happening? Hey, my name is Big Snoop Dogg, and I am the employee of the month. And you know what I'm gonna do today? I'm giving away a chicken finger in each meal. You better not tell my boss, Tao. She's not gonna tell, you're not gonna tell.
So I'm trying to figure out, when did people realize when they were in the drive-thru that it was Snoop Dogg? Did he introduce himself? I am Snoop Dogg.
I think they just knew. The minute they heard his voice, and then when they saw him, I mean, it's Snoop.
Once they saw him, for sure.
Yeah.
So this is the Henderson location over there at East Lake Mead and Boulder Highway, taking orders, serving chicken fingers ahead of National Chicken Finger Day this Sunday. Also greeting fans, posing for selfies, and just smoke weed every day.
Reporting tribal nations each week is truly an honor and pleasure. Sovereign nations continue to build impactful economic plans that may include cannabis operations. In the latest Cannabis Science and Technology, The Rise of Indigenous Cannabis, here's a rundown of tribes that have cannabis operations. There are 574 federally recognized Native American tribes in the United States. 10% of tribes have open recreational and medical cannabis dispensaries. There are 77 retail cannabis outlets, dispensaries, that are currently operating, and they are owned by 59 tribes across 9 states. The 9 states include Washington, California, Nevada, Minnesota, New York, North Carolina, South Dakota, Michigan, New Mexico, and most recently, I reported on this last week, Nebraska. 100 cannabis and hemp cultivation programs in tribal communities exist. 26% of indigenous communities are involved with cannabis or hemp programs, according to the Indigenous Cannabis Industry Association, ICIA. And tribal continues to thrive and grow. Stop by your local tribal dispensary or consumption lounge and check them out. Many of the proceeds go directly into their communities for education, infrastructure, healthcare, and wellness. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
You have to be impressed with the determination of the Smart and Safe Florida group that is once again trying to get an adult use legalization question on the ballot for 2026. 2 years ago, their initiative fell just 4% short of the 60% approval goal necessary in that state to make that result law. Florida continues to have a vibrant medical market with over 900,000 registered patients, the most of any state that has decriminalized the plant medicine. Interestingly enough, the state of Oklahoma has the most medical patients registered by percentage of their population, with a total of 10% of its citizens registered in that state's medical program. In her Oklahoma report this week, Kimmie Cannabis tells us about an initiative in her state to help cancer patients gain access to medical cannabis and help defray the cost. Here's Kimmie.
I am Kimmie Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Today we're highlighting the heart of Oklahoma's medical cannabis program, the patients and the incredible companies working behind the scenes to help them heal. Daniel Knowles recently fought and won a battle against rectal cancer. During that journey, he received support from Jamie Bennett and the team at Cancer Playbook, who provided full extract cannabis oil through their patient program. Be Elevated, who makes and donates oil, And a Dunkin'-based dispensary stepped up by selling THC suppositories for just $1. Another powerful example of community care is American Cannabis, a donating company that supports the breast cancer survivors of Oklahoma. These are the kinds of quiet, powerful stories that show how deeply rooted compassion still lives in Oklahoma cannabis. But patients are also calling for more, especially when it comes to education inside dispensaries. Many report a lack of product knowledge at the bud tender level and wish brands and producers were more involved in educating staff and patients directly. We asked our community, what's still missing from the Oklahoma cannabis industry? We really need documented research. Too much misinformation is out there. While patients do understand that until cannabis is federally legal, scientific research remains limited. There's still a desire for better access to what we do know and for companies to lead the way in providing clear, consistent education. Other feedback included more low-dose and high CBD options, vegan edibles, access to affordable RSO, and education around chronic illnesses like lupus and autism. We need targeted support, not just discounts, but real inclusion. Oklahoma has heart, but we still have work to do. That's it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Report. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
You don't need me to tell you that this country is more divided politically than it has been since the Vietnam War in the decade of the 60s. However, Republicans and Democrats do agree on one thing when it comes to plant medicine. More research is needed on mushrooms or psilocybin. The anecdotal evidence is powerful when this plant is used to help veterans with PTSD or obsessive compulsive disorder. More capital is being raised in this space than for cannabis, as the government's over-regulation has stymied the growth of the industry. What's fascinating to many in the cannabis space is that psilocybin is a psychedelic, and there have been as many as 100 deaths caused by the plant worldwide. You know how many deaths have been caused by overuse of cannabis? None. Yet both political parties see the medicinal benefits of the psychedelic, while the cannabis industry continues to fight the stigma that has existed for close to a century. In the meantime, in Maryland, more dispensaries continue to open as that relatively new market grows. There is an ongoing search in Maryland to find a location for a cannabis business incubator that would help inexperienced operators gain knowledge from others in their entrepreneurial efforts. And with more from Maryland, here is Christopher Bright.
I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. A bipartisan coalition of attorneys general led by Maryland Anthony G. Brown is urging Congress to pass the Safer Banking Act of 2025. The legislation would allow banks to serve state-regulated cannabis businesses, addressing public safety risks tied to cash-only operations. With U.S. legal cannabis sales hitting $30.1 billion in 2024 and supporting 400,000 jobs, the coalition argues the act would enhance tax collection, regulatory oversight, and economic stability without altering federal cannabis laws. Currently, 39 states and D.C. permit medical cannabis, while 24 states allow adult use, yet many face banking restrictions. The act would create a safe harbor for financial institutions, improving transparency and safety in states where cannabis is legal. That's all for this week's of Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
If you are a medical card holder in your state, you might want to check out what LeafWell is offering for personalized clinical guidance. There are so many options on how to use this product. Now with sprays, tinctures, edibles, vapes, and of course, flour is still the most popular way to consume responsibly. But now LeafWell is offering its monthly personalized guidance with medical consultants for just $9.99 a month. Since most health plans are still not allowing medical cannabis to be covered, LeafWell is paired up with some major dispensary chains to collaborate with 700 dispensaries to deliver those personalized plans. They are also offering the service to licensed dispensaries as an employee benefit. development that is a significant sign of acceptance by the medical community. The fastest growing demographic in cannabis is the over 50 crowd, and one of the organizations Lethal is working with is the Association of Mature American Citizens and their 2 million members. And finally tonight, if you happen to be watching this from Minnesota, you have a chance to enter a contest to name that gummy. Minnesota is starting up its adult use sales, and a company in Eden Prairie is holding a contest for its line of THC-infused gummies. And get this, they will be sold at their liquor store. The Eden Prairie liquor store is running the contest through July 29th, so if you want to enter a name, enter this week. They are encouraging weird names, so get your creative hats on and submit. Maybe something like Yummy Gummy or Grandma's Gummies or whatever you can imagine. So this is just a fun opportunity for you to engage with your creativity and with your favorite strain of flower and come up with something weird. The prize will be getting your name on the packaging and a free pack of the gummies. That'll do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there, so consume it responsibly.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
The quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. Now we even have our own app. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com